Okay, so welcome back to another episode 2 of Web3 Insights podcast series. This one's called the CTOs Tech Blueprint. It gives me great pleasure to introduce everyone to Richard Watts, who is currently CTO at Zilliqa. So thanks for coming on, Richard.
Hello, it's great to be here.
Excellent.
Um,
Richard, if you just wanted to maybe start by just giving a bit of an introduction, I suppose, for the benefit of the audience into your background and experience, and I suppose a bit of an insight into how and why you ended up where you are today, really.
okay. Sure. I started out at Cambridge way back in the 90s. I did a degree there. I worked a little bit on web-based FAQ software, sort of the kind of stuff that ChatGPT is trying to replace today. Um, Spent a little bit of time designing chips. Then went off and worked for a remote team doing video decoders. Weirdly enough, so we wrote single chip H.264 video decoders for DSPs. Um,
Yes.
that company got bought, and I wasn't very keen on the acquirer, so I bought it back, ran it for a few years, and then got distracted into payment stuff. So I was CTO at BigPay, AirAsia's financial arm, for about 5 years, and then ended up at Zilliqa. Um, um, by sort of various shenanigans, where I've been for the last couple of years, building layer one infrastructure and applications based on top of it.
Nice, nice. That's yeah, no, fantastic to hear. So to give the audience a bit more insight into Zilliqa, then, from my understanding of Zilliqa as a business and having worked with Zilliqa in the past, is that they're a high performance, high security blockchain platform for enterprises and essentially the next generation of applications. I mean, from your side, what more information can you give us on what Zilliqa do and anything sort of exciting working on at the moment?
I'm bad at exciting. I'm a techie. I get quite enthusiastic about the technology, but the application stuff I generally leave to the marketing folks. Um, but really, sort of Zalika was the first sharded blockchain, and we're trying
Nice.
to bring that legacy into today. So there turns out to be quite hard to get. It turns out to be quite hard to execute blockchain transactions in parallel. In general, for reasons that perhaps we'll get into later, but tend to be quite technical.
Yeah.
So the first generation of Zalika was very competitive at the time, but obviously time has moved on. People have found better ways of doing things, and now we're building Zalika 2, which is our sort of second cut at the problem, as it were. Trying to revamp our infrastructure and build something that's an attractive blockchain for modern applications in the more developed blockchain economy that we find ourselves in. And we
Nice.
also sort of do tokenization projects to sort of consolidate that sort of vertical tech stack that we've got.
Mm-hmm. Great, excellent. So moving on into the podcast then and the questions, we sort of previously discussed. Firstly, discussing around sort of technology innovations and challenges. Web3, as we've discussed, is constantly evolving in new technologies and protocols, which, as I said to you before we jumped on the call here, is one of the reasons I wanted to start this podcast, because it's always so complex and so evolving, and it's hard to keep on top of. But what are some of the most exciting innovations you are currently focused on, and what are the biggest sort of technical challenges that your team is addressing?
So interestingly, those turn out to be two different things.
Yeah.
So the exciting bit of this, so sort of, I think Web3 is kind of two different things. It's a movement for decentralizing the internet, turning it back into what it kind of used to be way back in the old days, a bunch of people exchanging messages. And then it got sort of very centralized and basically turned into the fangs telling us what to think, and then we thought it. Um,
Sure.
and so there's a sort of a big groundswell of people who want to, who want to decentralize the internet, and that sort of gives you that gives you the retail economy. It gives you people doing applications on the blockchain where two people need to agree is really where blockchain works in that sense. On the other hand, because blockchain is also primarily financial, it's distributed financial infrastructure. There's a whole
Yeah.
pile of money coming into it, and with money comes institutions, comes organizations, and so the sort of exciting bits of the technology really are around identity and onboarding. So how do you get people to be able to use Web3 in a way that isn't that doesn't require them to use Linux and download Git and generate private keys and stuff,
Sure.
or at least generate them in a friendly way. And on the other hand, there's a whole pile of stuff that involves how do you allow people to access financial infrastructure from Web3? How do you let them do something interesting with it? How do you give them access to content? And that content tends to be financial content. We don't think it needs to be. There's a whole range of other content that people can that people can access, but the primary penetration at the moment is financial, and there's a whole pile of work to do in integrating how people are how the money is managed with how Web3 is managed, which gives you a second sort of layer to that puzzle. Um,
Yeah.
um,
And within that, what are you finding is um, the technically the most challenging aspects, and how are you sort of overcoming those as well?
Technically, this might be an unpopular point of view, but technically the biggest challenge with Web3 is its sheer complexity. With distributed systems, are their sheer complexity. Um, the in terms of sorry, I'm gonna kind of answer this in the kind of sexy way, which
Sure.
is which is the L1s. People focus a lot on L1s. They focus a lot on distributed systems. So I'm going to too, because it's what people seem to want to hear about. But I will note that there's a whole pile of stuff in the application space, which Zilliqa is also involved in, that becomes very interesting as well in a
For
slightly
sure.
different way. Maybe we can look at that later. But in terms of distributed systems, they're complicated and they're difficult. They're hard. There are lots of fairly fundamental reasons why you can't do the things that you intuitively expect to be able to do. And so controlling that complexity, particularly in a relatively small team, I mean, Zilliqa sort of has 15, 20 techies. In that kind of team, building systems of that sort of complexity, you need very tight control over the complexity and very tight control over the test coverage that you're going to get in order to produce a system that will work reliably. And that's kind of our primary challenge.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah. No, cool. And um, moving on then, in terms of like, given the fast pace, or well, how fast paced the evolution of Web3 technologies are, and those, sort of complexities in and around it, which you were discussing there, how do you ensure your tech team remains at the forefront of those industry advancements, and has the skills necessary to, for them to innovate and adapt?
this is one of the places where having a research background kind of helps you, because you're right. Web3 is a bit of a fire hose. There's lots of information. There's lots of people who have discovered things, and they're quite cool things usually. They're good stuff, but you can only pay attention to a certain amount of it. And
Yeah.
so the sort of two halves. The first half is to expand your ability to absorb that information. We do that by starting off by hiring, by being quite selective in hiring. And what we try to do is to assemble a team of people who are good at adapting to change, because there's always change. So you
Yeah,
hire
for
people who are
sure.
motivated, who have who are good at, don't necessarily have the experience, but do have that willingness to learn, do have the ability to assimilate information quickly. and then organize them into self-determining units, groups, small groups that can do stuff on their own, don't require heavy interdependencies. And that gives you a sense of momentum. People are eager to learn, they're capable of learning. Now you've got to restrict the amount that you put into that team, the amount of information you feed that team, to something they can actually cope with. You've got a team that can cope with a lot, but you've still got to limit the amount, because otherwise they're not going to know what to pay attention to.
Yeah, of
And
course.
we do that by sort of progressively funneling that information down. Not in a sort of dictatorial way, but form interest groups, research interest groups, that sort of thing. And then we have an R&D arm led by Zoltan Verzekas, who's brilliant, and and spends his time doing what I wish I could do, and reading all the research papers, going around the web, feeding that data in as a sort of dedicated function.
Nice, nice. I suppose this is one of these sort of sticking subjects actually at the moment. You briefly sort of touched upon it there in terms of your approach to hiring staff. Because one thing I get asked a lot from a lot of people that and candidates, engineers, developers that I speak to on a day-to-day basis is good engineers is how do they get into this space? They've come from solid, strong Web 2 backgrounds. From a CTO's perspective, from your perspective, what do you think that they need to do to enter the world of Web3? Is there anything they can do from educational perspective, from running pieces of software, putting it onto GitHub, or what would your advice be there?
That's a very difficult question,
It
because
is, yeah.
the thing is, the things I think are not, I'm reasonably sure, aren't thought by very many other people. So this is kind of personal advice, and it will work on me, but it might not work on other people. So I'll
For sure.
caveat it with that. But generally, what I'm looking for when, first, I mean, it's worth, your CV needs to get seen. So if you have particular targets, then find out how their recruitment works, find out who they use, and submit your CV. And make sure that your CV even gets to the sort of companies that you want to work for. And it's worth being fairly selective about those, because, I mean, just generally when I'm advising people, make sure you apply to companies you actually want to work for.
Sure.
Otherwise, you may get a job, but it'll be a terrible job, and you'll hate it, and no one's going to be happy at that. If the match is wrong, just say no. I know it's hard advice to take, but I think it's good advice. But in terms of then getting the interview, getting the job, what I tend to look for on a CV is evidence that you've done something that I can measure, that's externally measured, that shows that you can understand complex concepts and then apply them. And the canonical one of those is actually your pre-university qualifications. So I look quite hard at which university you went to, and I do that because the thing that got you into that university was a 2-year course with an exam at the end of it, which is quite well regulated. There's a standard external exam. They're about as difficult as each other. So what I actually do is look at your A-levels, weirdly enough. Universities, if you've got a first from a good university, that's quite selective, but university results tend to be variable at best and only really good for institutions that I know quite well, and I don't know very many of them quite well, so I tend not to worry about that. Other things that, I mean, obviously, by the time you get to university, that bird has kind of flown and there's not much you can do about it. But what you can do is to put something on GitHub that's sort of genuinely good, genuinely interesting. Don't just clone something and change a couple of variables. It's not going to impress anyone. But write something that is clever. Build an emulator for a reversible computer. Write a GPU interpreter for EVM. Might take you an afternoon, might take you a day, but it's stuff that when I look at it, I'm going to go, okay, that's quite clever. I couldn't have written that in an afternoon. I want to speak to this person.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's such great advice actually, and I think that's really beneficial for anyone listening in and wanting to get into this space, right? It's about applying yourself and showcasing the skills that you have got, and doing it with something that's worthwhile, like you said, not cloning something and which a hundred or thousands of other people could and probably would normally do anyway. Differentiating yourself and coming out with something amazing to be able to showcase. So that's absolutely brilliant. Um, one of these things I was thinking on whilst you're talking sort of earlier, I think you sort of briefly touched when we were touching on the technological advancements in blockchain and of course decentralized systems. I'm keen to maybe give you the opportunity to be able to sort of share, I suppose, how Zilliqa are ensuring that it remains at the cutting edge of innovation and sharing any upcoming projects or technologies that you're particularly excited about within the business.
Thank you. Yep. So there's lots to be excited about. I mean, starting perhaps on the application side, one of the
Sure.
things we're trying to do quite aggressively is to improve the onboarding experience. Um, and that comes in the form of semi-custodial wallets, secret sharing, and just the nitty gritty of the technology involved in sharing identities and allowing for stuff like proxy transactions, and that feeds into the blockchain side on the basis of where account abstraction turns up. Um, this is something we've been exploring for a long time. It will be out in Zilliqa 2. It's not a launch feature, but it will be out reasonably shortly after launch, which allows us to do stuff like abstract gas out, because gas is a really big is a really big bit of really big impediment to people adopting utility tokens because they need gas and they don't really understand it. Um, so below that, we're sort of interested in keeping transactions cheap and in keeping a blockchain which has the characteristics that customers need of it. And so our old sharding infrastructure was based essentially on static dependency management. Your accounts were stored in a shard, and if two accounts in different shards wanted to communicate, they had to communicate through a central committee, the
Okay.
DS committee. Um, Ethereum sort of tried that too. Solana kind of does it. Ethereum and Solana, and in fact, I think we did at one point, experimented with having people list what shards you need to run these transactions in parallel. That kind of doesn't work, or at least doesn't work all that comfortably. It's quite a difficult thing for developers to supply. And so one of the things that Zilliqa is doing is having X shards, which essentially allow you to essentially are explicit groups of contracts that then communicate with each other, and that shifts the problem from can I make these work fast? Obviously, I can. I can have arbitrarily small groups of them. And one of the things that X shards allow you to do is to vary the trustability, so vary the transaction latency and cost based on the group that you're in. So you can have a shard that has really low cost, really fast transactions, isn't very secure. You can have another shard that is very, very secure, has very, very expensive transactions, but goes more slowly as a result.
Yeah.
Then you need to communicate between them. And one of the exciting things that we've been doing is doing quite a lot of work in how you go about doing this effectively. And that leads to innovations like concurrent transactions, where transactions can happen on two chains at the same time, or resumable transactions, which is kind of what we ended up with, where a transaction can suspend itself whilst another transaction happens on another chain, on another X shard, and then resume transparently at the point where they left off.
Hmm.
That also feeds off into some other innovations. So one of the things that we're looking at for Zilliqa 2 is future is timed transactions in the future. So when you withdraw stake, for example, currently you've got this rather complicated thing where you have to unbond it and then withdraw it in a separate transaction. And this would allow us to unbond it, and then it will automatically filter into your wallet after 2 weeks. That kind of stuff.
Nice. Yeah, nice. I
And
mean,
of course,
it sounds like there's
consensus.
yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of interesting and exciting stuff going on for you guys at the moment, which is great to hear. And yeah, I'm sure we'll no doubt see some of this exciting stuff come out in the near future.
Yes. I don't have a release date yet, and I'm trying not to push too hard for one. But Jasper, our new ZQ2 testnet, will be coming out very soon in the next few weeks. So do keep a watch for that. Do try it out. Let us know how it goes. Do contribute. It's it's open source. It's on GitHub. So do send patches in. And that'll be followed by a Zilliqa 2 mainnet later in the year, which will be a transparent transition from the current Zilliqa mainnet. So the only thing that you should see when that mainnet comes out is that all of your transactions will be faster, and you'll get a few new facilities in terms of interaction between Scylla, our own smart contract language, and EVM.
Great stuff.
So,
Great stuff. Well,
looking forward to that.
fantastic. Well, it's been great to have you on, Richard. Thank you very much for joining. I think it's a really good time to sort of wrap it up there. For anyone listening in or watching, please feel free to leave comments, ask questions to either Richard or myself in the comments below. If you liked the podcast today, go and give Web3 Insights podcast series a follow on LinkedIn and YouTube. And yeah, thanks, Richard. It's been great catching up with you, and yeah, hopefully we'll catch up again at some point soon.
Yeah, brilliant. It's been great to be here. Thank you very much, and look forward to catching up soon.